Good evening. I'd like to call to order the November 16th regular Planning Commission meeting. If we could have a roll call.
Commissioner Fauna Bernardi?
Here.
Commissioner Fresco?
Here.
Commissioner Lambert?
Here.
Commissioner Landris?
Here.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Here.
Commissioner Raskin?
Here.
Chair Reese?
Here. Director's report, please.
David wasn't able to join us tonight, so I'll be giving the director's report on his behalf. You can see the upcoming Planning Commission schedule here. Our next regular meeting will be on November the 30th, or excuse me, that's a special meeting where we will continue the discussion of the housing element invitation as part of this second grouping. There'll be a map extension on that hearing as well. December 7th is a regular meeting, and that's where we will begin our third and final grouping of these implementation red lines. That will be SB 9 and ADUs. And we'll also have the final ADU grant presentation on that evening, and then a special meeting on December the 14th to wrap up that third grouping to look at parking. And we'll also be bringing back to you some revised red lines based on what we heard earlier, particularly around, I think, development standards, where the commission had some comments and suggestions that you'd like to see. We mostly would like to make sure that we heard you correctly before we come back with, the recommendations in January when you will actually be voting. You'll also have on that evening recommendation on use of private outdoor space on private property. And then we also anticipate scheduling a hearing for a hotel at 516 Colorado Avenue as well. Recent City Council meeting since we last met. There was a meeting last night. There was no action of note that would be within the Planning Commission's purview. Understand that there's a special meeting of the City Council scheduled for November 29th. That seemed to be a carryover of some continued items. And then December 6th will be the installation of the new City Council. And with that, that concludes the director's report for tonight.
Okay. Commissioners, do we have questions? I do not see any for you tonight, Jane. We're going to move on. So now I'd like to make a couple of announcements. Please note tonight's procedures for public comment. We're accepting real-time public comment by phone for each item. Please check the top of the posted agenda for the phone number to call once the caller queue for each item opens. The caller queue will open when each item is introduced and will close after the first 5 public comments are heard. Written comments received up until noon today have been read by the Commission. Comments received after 12 p.m. today will be considered part of the record of the proceedings, but may not be posted online with the Planning Commission agenda prior to the meeting. Another comment about the moderator function, or the chat function. The moderator chat function in BlueJeans is for technical help only. It is not public comment. We cannot see it. We cannot respond to it. So again, it's only for technical help with BlueJeans. Commissioners, do you have any other announcements tonight? I am not seeing any, so I'm going to move. Commissioner Sanders?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that people may be aware that last night the City of Santa Monica issued a formal apology to the Black community in Santa Monica for historical discrimination, and the apology was something that included quite a lot that Commissioner Fresco had brought to the public's attention during the early work on the housing element. So I think that would not have happened in the way that it had it not been for Nina's leadership, and I just wanted to offer that word of appreciation to her for her efforts for bringing it to the fore, and it led to our substantial work on the housing element to assure fair housing and respond to historic redlining and discrimination, but it has now also led to a formal apology from the city. So I think that's important and want to commend Commissioner Fresco for her leadership.
Thanks.
I agree. Congratulations, Nina.
Thank you, Sean. You know, I just joined that process at the very end. There were a lot of people who were working on that for a really long time. And the hope is that it's the beginning of a lot of change and shift in the city in the way we do things and the way we think about things. So it's kind of an exciting thing. And it was a really beautiful evening of a lot of really heartfelt exposition that was really great to see and be a part of.
Okay, well, congratulations on that work again. And I think we're going to move on with the agenda. I'm looking at our next agenda items and I see nothing under 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're going to move right to 9 and 9A. And this is implementation of the 6th cycle housing element for 2021, 2029. We'll open the public call-in, our queue, and then also ask staff to do their presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll see that. So tonight we will be kicking off, excuse me, that's a typo. That should be the second grouping of amendments, and it's around program 1A, 1B, and 2E, which is the process streamlining for housing approvals, streamlined design review process, and the applicability of the zoning ordinance to sites. Just where we are in the process tonight, is this discussion. We're really looking for, again, as we have been, the Planning Commission's questions and feedback, and really just get a general sense of the Commission's response to the proposed red lines that are attached to your agenda. You can see where we are today with respect to our second grouping. On November 30th, we will be reviewing sort of like our special housing incentive programs around the moderate income housing overlay, community assembly sites, and residentially zoned surface parking lots before we move into our third grouping in December. Before we jump in, I did want to review just a summary of your last meeting when we discussed the Affordable Housing Production Program and Density Bonus, where we presented to the Commission, in addition to the red lines, the technical assistance letter that we had received from HCD, sort of, tying together the pieces and providing guidance around how to relate our local inclusionary ordinances and state density bonus law. So, what was proposed at that meeting was providing essentially like a local incentive. So, additions to our local ordinance that would reconcile, some of the allowances under state density bonus law and the city's inclusionary requirements. And there seemed to be general support from the Commission for that approach. There was certainly considerable discussion and questions around that. There was also general support for thinking about what we presented around where offsite affordable housing units that satisfy the AHPP could be located. So the red lines, currently state in disadvantaged areas as mapped by Cal EPA through SB 535. Based on public comments, we took those to heart. We actually discussed that more when we met with the Housing Commission last week, and I think generally, there seems to be, we heard sort of general support from the Commission and also the Housing Commission to look at it in an alternative way in terms of looking at prior concentrations of affordable housing in the city and allowing maybe that to guide us in terms of generally where we want to, direct where offsite units can go, versus where they can if we want to provide that flexibility around the city. I do want to note that there was some concern expressed by a couple of commissioners about excluding anywhere in the city, especially in those areas that are most proximate to transit, especially when we're talking about affordable housing units. And then finally, around the density bonus ordinance, there wasn't too much, I think, discussion and commentary around that, but we did note, as we've discussed before, there was mention of a pro forma. It wasn't meant to say that we required it anyway. It was just as sort of an example, but we're totally fine striking that language to reduce any confusion. I think consideration for the list of incentives and concessions, a sort of buy right menu, that's proposed in there. So wanted to provide that summary of the discussion to make sure that we think we heard you correctly, in terms of, sort of generally your sense of the red lines from the November 2nd meeting.
Okay.
Sorry, did you want to pause there and have some?
Well, yeah, I did want to ask, does
Yeah,
anybody
sure.
on the commission have another thought on that? Do they agree with that summary? Commissioner Lambert?
I do not. And I can't remember if anybody agreed with me last time, but I have grave concerns about using the AHPP and the DBL projects in tandem as it was proposed. I really think that it causes problems from the standpoint of the West Hollywood letter and feasibility. So that's not reflected in this summary.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I just want to highlight again, I'm the one who brought up this some concern expressed by excluding off-site affordable units near transit. I think I was supported a little bit by Commissioner Raskin, but I never heard that anybody was opposed to that. I'm just curious if we can get a show of hands of anybody who is objecting to locating affordable housing right within a circumference of transit.
No.
Yeah, I don't think this is phrased properly, if I may. The issue was I believe the issue was sort of Cal Enviroscan's exclusionary zones, and that the way that those zones were playing out were actually removing the downtown from eligibility, and there's already plans for affordable units to go there, which we approved in a DA. So multiple DAs actually. So I think that phrasing it didn't have to do with we noted that those areas were more proximate to transit, but that wasn't the argument for why they shouldn't be excluded. We were saying that they shouldn't be excluded because that's where the jobs are and that's where there are existing projects.
Right.
And that's where it made sense to put them.
Okay.
So I think it was more than just some. I think it was the majority. I think it may have been unanimous, in fact.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to see there was more support of that. I thought when I raised it, it really related to transit because I would see whether it was red line areas or that Enviroscan, we were carving out places where we had our transit stops with the expo, and that just didn't make sense. But it seems like we're all in agreement, or I don't see anybody objecting to that. So let's move forward with the conversation.
Actually, I have one more quick point. I think we also brought up that we should be able to do off-site acquisition of existing housing in areas such as Pico in order to stabilize the housing for the people who live there. I know. Right, I brought it up.
Yeah, that was still so that part is actually part of a future phase because it's quite complex. When we're talking about acquisition, rehab, and existing tenants. So that's not in your red lines right now, but that concept is not being put aside by any means. It just needs a lot of future exploration. I did want to clarify around this piece. The reason that we wanted to highlight that comment is because the sort of red areas in the Cal Enviroscreen map line up with where our major transit stops are. It's effectively like on either side of the freeway, and so that's why we presented the map showing the sort of where the existing concentrations of affordable housing are. So I just wanted to clarify that was the crux of sort of what I'll call a dilemma here, in terms of concerns around what we've heard from the Housing Commission, sort of like over concentration of putting more affordable housing where it's already located versus the comments we're hearing that, well, those are also the areas that are the closest to transit. And so that's just to provide sort of a clarification as to what we've been hearing around discussions on that concept.
Okay. Can I just paraphrase, and what I'm hearing maybe is the Housing Commission has been more focused on the staying away from over-concentration issue, where Planning Commission had said, let's try to use the transit to the best of our ability, or the downtown area where the jobs are. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I just, for the record, I think we're all the commissioners are concerned about over-concentration issues as well. But I think in this case, the transit is a little bit more important.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for.
With that, let me ask you to keep moving along, please.
Sure thing. Oh, I think I see Commissioner Fondon-Mardy's hand raised.
Oh, I apologize.
Sorry, my little screen here.
This is a follow-up from our last meeting where we are starting having a discussion regarding the kinds of super bedroom units with very little parking. Where does that fit in, or either our current red lines or on future hearings we're going to hear about updating our parking bedroom kind of ratios?
You're talking about parking requirements for minimum parking
projects where projects that have like 15 bedrooms, one kitchen, and that reads as one unit, I'll call it because we say, typically two cars per unit for 3 bedrooms and above, or whatever our new code might say. Where do we deal with the possibility of many bedrooms, but it's still only one unit technically because there's only one kitchen? I don't know if we have to deal with it now, but we did raise it last meeting, so it has to be embedded somewhere in our discussion, either here or downstream.
So it sounds like you're talking about maybe like a group residential situation, or in situations where it's like co-living. We will have, so when we were thinking about parking red lines, it was sort of an implementation of the housing element program, which talks about, sort of reducing parking requirements for housing. And particularly in light of AB 2097, our zoning code is going to be made consistent with that, where regardless of the unit size, the city cannot impose minimum parking requirements. I think we're going to have to give that a little bit of think. I definitely hear you on that, but to the extent this is about implementing the housing element programs, we may have to park that for some additional discussion. I don't think that's been the sort of major points of the housing element program.
Okay, I just don't want to be lost in the shuffle.
Okay.
Okay. I think we have no more questions. So, Jing, if you can go ahead and continue with your presentation.
Sure. So I'm going to jump into program 1A, which is the streamline approvals. So this is the program where the city is committing to implement, what is currently in interim zoning ordinance form into a permanent ordinance form, and that involves, establishing a process that has no public hearings for code compliant, 100% affordable housing projects, moderate income overlay projects, streamlined housing projects, downtown tier 1 and tier 2 housing projects. And note that change has already been done, so does not need to be included in these red lines. And then housing on sites that have been recycled from the fifth cycle element. That last bullet there is actually absolutely required by state law, so that is something that we must do. You can see up top there that there is a definition of streamlined housing projects. So we have already reviewed housing projects, the definition, that was in our first grouping. That was the projects where non-residential uses, can be up to 33% of the floor area of a project. There is for the purposes of the streamlining program, in the red lines, there is a definition called streamlined housing project, and that is basically including an extra local incentive, because this is something that is unique to Santa Monica, that we are lowering that non-residential percentage to 25% to basically include a higher percentage of residential in these projects that would qualify for streamlining. And that would be consistent with the existing IZO, and that is also consistent with prior council direction. You can see here also that, if I may note that when the IZO was adopted or extended, I guess, on January 25th of this year, earlier this year, council added in a 1 acre threshold as well into the IZO. So basically, for sites over an acre, they will, projects on those sites would not qualify for this no public hearing process. And that would apply only to streamlined housing projects, but not the other ones that you see on this list here. What does that mean, actually? This is a table that actually is an analysis of our SSI, and it's basically 7 sites out of the 340 that are in the SSI. So it's a very small number of sites that are above that 1 acre, and you can see the capacity that makes up. So for consolidated sites, these are ones that have common ownership, and they could be merged together. The capacity there is about 400 units, which is like 4% of the RHNA. And then on these other sites that are not consolidated sites, you can see it's the number there of 1187, which is about 13% of the RHNA. And again, but note also the ones with the asterisks, the single asterisks. So the Snyder Diamond, Rite Aid, the business park at 2848 Colorado, 1301 Wilshire, which is the Vons grocery store. Those are all recycled sites, and those must be processed by right per state law, regardless. So that even if the city established, we could not establish a threshold by state law. Those must be processed without public hearing. We also wanted to note here that 1343 Ocean Park Boulevard, which is the Mount Olive Church, that would qualify under our Special Community Assembly surface parking lot program. The red lines for that propose that any housing project on those sites would be processed as an AA, again, regardless of size. So we thought this would be helpful information for the commission to have an understanding the effects of that new threshold.
Jane, I'm sorry. That's going to be an important discussion point, so I think I need to stop you here and ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
I mean, in my reading, this is what you're really telling us is even though this is in here and we've heard concerns that this could create some controversy with our housing element, that even though we've included this 1 acre limit, there's only 7 projects, and because 3 of them or 4 of them were on the site's inventory before, they are mandated to go by state law as streamlined projects.
Right, as long as these have like 20% on site.
Okay, and then the church site you're saying would fall into another category of streamlining for our, I forget exactly what we're referring to, but it's
right, which is a policy choice, I guess I'll note. Right, that's in our proposed red lines. Because that's something we've not discussed yet.
So really what we're talking about is 2 sites. I mean, again, assuming everybody else gets 20% affordable, it's really 2 sites where this would have an impact.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to get that out there. Thank you. And
I have a question too, Jim.
Yep.
What if there are sites that are not on the SSI that come in over 1 acre? They would then fall into that bucket, right?
Yeah, I think to clarify, we were just highlighting for the SSI that there's certainly, absolutely, that there could be projects, on sites that are not on the SSI as well. So I don't want to say that it's only 2 sites that are, impacted, but, obviously sites over an acre in Santa Monica are not typical. There's, but the SSI is what we looked at, because that was what was used to demonstrate capacity for the purposes of demonstrating compliance with housing element.
Well, I would just ask that you make sure that this complies with the language of Program 1A, because I don't think it does. But there's no 1 acre threshold in the language of that program.
Yeah, can I ask that of the city attorney? Can I ask the city attorney a question?
Go ahead, Tom.
Great.
As long as it's on this issue.
No, it's specifically on this issue because I'd just like to get some guidance. We received a letter claiming that the housing element that was approved by council did not include the 1 acre threshold, and staff is presenting us with a report that presumes the 1 acre threshold. So I'm wondering what the city's position is on that, because I think it speaks to we are having other conversations about things that we may want to do that challenge or don't challenge the housing element. So I'd like to get an understanding from the city attorney of whether, if in fact it's the city's position that this threshold applies and was in our housing element, what makes it so, or in fact, what's the argument, that we've been advised by the letter from the public. So just help us understand where you're coming from.
That's what I was trying to say, Sean.
Sure. So, just in terms of timing of how this evolved, I think you may be aware or may recall, Program 1A was adopted by the City Council initially in October of 2021 with the first round, right? Got sent up to HCD, was being reviewed at the time that the 1 acre threshold was added in the IZO. So just to kind of give you that sort of understanding of how this evolved, we did have discussions with HCD about the 1 acre threshold as we were revising the housing element for this second round that just got approved and certified. So just, we're aware of the issue. I think overall, in general, the city and HCD look for actions that are consistent or inconsistent with the housing element, right? And so, consistency isn't always like a yes or no. Like if the language is silent, there may be some ability to take actions that are not necessarily inconsistent, if that makes sense, right? So no, there is no 1 acre threshold in the language, but it also doesn't necessarily preclude adding that 1 acre threshold.
Can I also ask how you plan to comply with AB 2011, given this? Which is ministerial with no threshold.
So I think AB 2011 is something that an applicant can opt into, is our understanding of it, and it's a new law that we're still, trying to understand and untangle. So if someone proceeded with a project of that nature and they qualified for it, then we would obviously follow state law in that regard. This is just with respect to this special local incentive, to create a by right process for housing approvals, and that we did consult with HCD, on the program language, and the action that council took, and just sort of understanding of how they might view it. And they were really focused on the SSI capacity, and because this is such a small amount of sites, and it's rather small percentage, of the overall capacity, their concern was as long as it's not, substantially affected by it, that the city could certainly have this policy discussion.
And so just to piggyback on what the planning manager said, and to clarify and to confirm, to the extent there is a state law provision that requires a by right process, right? There are several potential options, that we've been discussing in state law that will control, right? If there is a state law provision that controls, that will control. It will trump whatever's going on with this. As the planning manager confirmed, this is a local incentive, but to the extent a state law provision applies, that would apply.
Okay. I think everyone's nodding that we can move forward with the presentation. I'm sure we'll come back to this. Thank you.
And yeah, we were just going to talk about the context of state law and streamlining. So currently, almost I think every housing application we have in currently is a project that is being processed under SB 330, which is the Housing Crisis Act. And we wanted to note here that there are some streamlined provisions within that. Most notably, there's a limit on a number of hearings. None of these housing projects require hearings. They're all going through an administrative approval process, but there are time limits to, both do a completeness review and provide code compliance comments, and those are moving forward at an efficient clip. There's also SB 35 streamlining, which may come into effect with the next annual progress report and determination from HCD. And this is probably in relation to the question that was asked prior, to the extent that there's any state law that requires, a particular process to be followed, that would override, any aspect of local law. Clearly, and SB 35 is an example of one of those, as long as, the project met all of the preconditions on that checklist. We have attached to just provide some clarity around this, we've attached to the agenda attachment, I think it's D, if I'm just checking here, attachment D, yeah, which is the a sort of like applicability table of different housing project types. We thought it might be helpful to walk through these. It basically goes through, the different kinds of housing projects that are created through these red lines. So the first example is this streamlined, it's this housing project. So it's not the streamlined housing project. It's the housing project that is, not more than 33%. So you can see that the 25 to 33% non-residential basically would qualify still qualify for protections of the Housing Accountability Act. And so the definition there is really taken straight from the Housing Accountability Act. And you can see there that for those projects, they would go through the development review permit process, or, like we said, to the extent, any aspect of state law overrides, that would control. You can see the different standards that would apply for that housing. And so this is provisions you've already seen in terms of applicability for multi-unit dwelling projects. And then we also added here columns on maximum allowable height or FAR, whether active ground floor use or ground floor design is required of pedestrian-oriented design. We thought this table would be helpful just to understand, again, what affects each kind of housing project. Same thing for the streamlined housing project. These are the ones that are the subject of tonight. So program 1A, these are the kinds of projects that would qualify for the no public hearing process or the administrative approval. But the same standards, that apply here would apply to, all of these larger housing projects. For downtown housing project, the downtown kind of has its own, obviously has a tier system, and it has an application threshold table that is specific to the DCP, but we've tried to make this consistent across the city. So the DCP is actually where that 25% of a non-residential floor area, came from, and now that's, covered throughout the city as sort of what qualifies as a streamlined housing project. And you can see there that Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects qualify for no public hearing. Tier 3 projects in the downtown require a development review permit for review. For 100% affordable housing projects, these are always administrative approvals, regardless, so there's no threshold, limitation for 100% affordable housing. Any 100% affordable housing project, as long as it meets the definition in the zoning code for affordable housing, you can definition there. It's a minimum 25% of the units deed restricted for occupancy by 60% income households or less, and then the remainder by 80% income households or less. And those projects can include non-residential floor area up to 33% of the total floor area. Those projects will always be in AA. And you can see tremendous incentives for affordable housing. They are exempt from unit mix and TDM requirements. They're required to do the air quality assessment if they're within that zone as identified in the EIR. And they also get the unlimited FAR, extra 33 feet, because they qualify under state density bonus law in pretty much all cases. And they would be exempt from active ground floor use, ground floor design, and pedestrian-oriented design, except for Maine and Montana. So that's consistent with other kinds of housing projects. Moderate income overlay projects are, getting the same advantages in terms of processing as 100% affordable. And these, we'll be discussing, those red lines at your next meeting. But these are, this is a special overlay zone that will be around our major transit stops. And you can see the difference here is that instead of the unlimited density, that would be a 50% density bonus for moderate income overlay projects. And then multiple unit dwelling projects on community assembly surface parking lots. As we noted on the prior slides, those kinds of projects would qualify for no public hearing, whereas other multiple unit dwelling projects will depend, based on the size threshold that is in the red lines. You can see that it's a little different when it's in residential zones versus commercial zones. So that's a quick rundown of the table, and certainly happy to get any questions or feedback about that at the conclusion of the presentation. Sorry.
Commissioner Fontaine, can you
Yeah,
wait?
I have a quick question. Can you explain what pedestrian-oriented design means?
Yeah, sure. So those are, so in your, this was actually in the first set of red lines. So that really speaks to, how the building addresses the street at the ground floor. And it's relatively, it's not the same as the active ground floor design, which is more about like active uses and, having transparency into it. This is more about just sort of like, ground floor openings, no like big blank walls, that sort of stuff. So that's really what that means.
And that is codified, meaning it's a definable thing. It's a bright line. Either you have X, Y, and Z, or you don't have X, Y, and Z.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lambert.
A quick question. If I understand this correctly, and I should remember this, if a project is a Housing Accountability Act compliant project, meaning it's code compliant, but it has more than 25% commercial, it goes into discretionary approval. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
All right, let's do the last question. I know I started this, but let's do this last question and then let's get through the presentation, which I doubt is much longer. Go ahead, Commissioner Landers.
I was just wondering what, and I'll come back to this. I'll keep the question short here, but I might come back to it in discussion. In the larger projects, can you explain what to what extent there are reviews of circulation considerations? Those have come up in the past where those changes have been negotiated at, prior to hearings, and I'm seeing a long list of, other than pedestrian-oriented design, where does circulation review come in?
I mean,
I'm thinking about placement of curb cuts, visibility from the street, basically the interaction with the streetscape and the impact on circulation that a project might have.
I mean, we have existing standards around, access to sites and, where that should come from. So that's already largely embedded within Chapter 9.28. And, to the extent those, like, they do have to be objective standards, so I think it is a work in progress to ensure, because even under SB 330, we are challenged to be, we cannot be unclear about our requirements, or things that are not written down, whether in policy, program, or code. But there are a lot of existing standards that already address those sorts of things in terms of, where access must be taken, where your loading zones are, that sort of thing, in order to minimize impact to the right-of-way and, adjacent neighborhoods.
Okay. I'll come back later with more. Thanks.
Okay. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Stephanie to go through the streamlined design review proposal under Program 1B.
Good evening, Commissioners. Stephanie Reich, Design and Historic Preservation Planner, to present the Streamlined Design Review. The Architectural Review Board has reviewed and put forward the following improvements to design review. We talked with ARB some time ago on these improvements and have been wanting to fold this into the housing element discussion or red line discussion as we are tonight. And so what the ARB agrees would be best for the project design is to encompass design review within the entitlement process. So right now, when we have a project, whether it's a development review project or an administrative approval project, we have a preliminary review and during that entitlement process. And then afterwards, we have a formal ARB review, and that is the final review. What we are proposing is to have one review that occurs when the preliminary review occurs now. So it would essentially be removing the review that happens after the AA is signed off on, the AA or the DR, as it were. And so, so that we believe is will actually enhance the design because comments that come earlier in the process are more easily incorporated into the design, and it removes the formal design review, which in many cases is the work, the best work of the ARB is now done in this preliminary review. So as I mentioned, with the public hearing, the design would happen before Planning Commission would hear it. And so with projects without a public hearing, the AA process, the design review would occur before the determination is issued. So before that entitlement review process is completed. So we believe that it's consistent, fairly consistent with what we're doing now, would result in the high quality of projects that you see in the built environment in Santa Monica, and would enhance and streamline the process. So we also believe that it will be easy to fulfill the SB 330 time limitations with this proposed streamlining process. If there's a next slide. And so we also discussed with the board to increase the number and size of projects that would be reviewed at the staff level. And so, what we discussed with the board would be projects that are up to 7,500 square feet, that those would be reviewed at the staff level. Those encompass primarily projects that are in the R2 and R3 zones that have, right now we see mostly 3-unit condos on them or 3-unit apartments. We anticipate seeing projects that are potentially the same size but more units if the affordable unit and density bonuses are utilized. And so since they will be the same size, 7,500 square feet would still be administratively reviewed, so reviewed by design review staff. And then for the multi-unit dwelling projects in residential zones, we're recommending that up to 10,000 square feet is reviewed administratively. And I think those are the two proposals. So no change to the appeal process. And then we will, as you know, we're currently developing objective design standards, which will closely follow the red line process. And the objective design standards, some of the components within those standards would necessarily be incorporated in the project when the ARB looks at it during the entitlement phase, and some will necessarily be reviewed during plan check. So that's the basic outline of the streamlining proposal that we wanted to bring with you tonight. We have more detail to share with you with any questions that you may want to ask.
Yeah, are we done with the formal presentation? Is that?
I think so. Jane,
We
I
just
think
have-
that's the slide, right?
Yeah, no, we just have one more slide.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh, I mean for the next program on city-owned sites, if we can finish that
Okay.
maybe.
Yeah. So we could take questions on this aspect now.
What are we doing?
Well,
Did you want-
I'm trying to get us through, but I'm trying to get us through the
Okay,
presentation before we ask questions.
Oh,
That's
okay.
fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and Chair,
Yes, sir.
I think it would be helpful if we could hear from the public before we get into substantive discussion, as we
Okay.
did last time. That was super helpful.
I'm with you. That sounds good. Thanks, John.
Jane, I think I can turn it back to you. Thanks.
Thank you. So the final slide we have here is really, it's actually a relatively simple amendment. This is not the fully formed city-owned sites program. Obviously, that will require, city council direction and input on this. But it was really sort of, setting the foundations for these city-owned sites. And the amendment really is subject to a public process, to be determined by the city council, that city-owned sites or city-owned properties would be exempt from the zoning ordinance. It provides the city, and the community, I think, more flexibility in ensuring, how we get to the unit capacities that are on here. So, you don't want to be hamstrung by, different things within the zoning ordinance, and really allowing the opportunity for these, the commitment for affordable housing on public land to be most successful. So that's really what, that particular amendment is about. Again, it's not the fully formed program. So with that is the completion of our presentation, and we can now get into the remainder of any commissioner questions.
Great. Okay, commissioners, does anybody have okay, I'm going to ask Commissioner Lambert. We'll ask any key questions now, but then we will turn to the public as soon as possible.
No, I'm fine with that, but during discussion, can we ask questions?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
of course. We'll come back and be able to ask questions. Okay, so with that, we've opened the caller queue. I will announce again, if you want to speak, please call in. Staff, do we have any callers at this moment?
Yes, we do. I'll share the number and then welcome in the first one.
Great.
Last four digits, 8475. You're now in the meeting and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. If you could please state your full name.
Hi, it's Barbara Kaplan, and I am Vice Chair of the Architectural Review Board. And I just wanted to call in, and I've reviewed the staff report, and I want to support the staff report based on many discussions we've had at the ARB regarding the timing of our review, whether it be later in the process or it be before the Planning Commission review, which is now our preliminary review. And I want to support that if we do only have one review, that it happen early on in the process. I think it helps the applicant because the earlier in the process the ARB reviews the project, the less changes will need to be made later on. And I think it also will help make the planning review process more efficient because we already will have reviewed design for massing and balance of open space, materiality, and other issues that we look at. So that was primarily just my support for the staff report on in program 1B specifically.
Okay, please hold on the line. Please hold on the line. Let's see. I know I have a question. I want to see if anybody else has questions for you. I don't see any. Ms. Kaplan, I have a concern about the ARB. I like the idea of getting in there early and getting comments because I think it's tough at the end of a project to make design changes. However, I'm concerned that there's a level of detail that you folks require and mandate for your review that is not always required for an entitlement, and that it's, in some cases it's easier to get your funding to go forward with those construction drawings once you have an entitlement. Are you seeing that there's a lesser requirement for those plans, or are you concerned about seeing, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that probably will be handled more with staff than the ARB. One of that is a more detailed landscape review and irrigation plan. We would just require preliminary landscape design. As well, with lighting, we get very specific with lighting right now. We require a full lighting plan. That also can be just preliminary if it's part of the design, and staff can review that later on without having to be reviewed in detail by the ARB. So there were a few areas where we talked about we could, we want to maintain review of all, of the materiality of the project and the accoutrements, the design of the handrails. But beyond that, staff might be able to review details later on as well, more architectural details, as long as we have overall design intention of anything that will be seen, especially in the public right-of-way. We also did much more in detail review of the interiors of the units, and I think we're limiting that now to exterior elevations, making sure, of course, that there's ventilation and windows, and exit. Of course, zoning will determine where the windows are in the bedrooms, but the balance of interior and exterior space, I think we are starting, or we've had discussions on the objective design standards as well, so that those objective design standards will cover a lot of the things that are discretionary now that we look at and talk about. So I think it'll be a more I think the whole process will be expedited. Even our design review would be expedited.
Okay. So you're not worried that you're going to get a lesser quality of plans that's going to make your job harder?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
We will speak up. It is. If the plans don't comply with basic standards that are set, and we don't have materials called out, we need that. We need to know what it's going to look like, what the massing will be. And those are, sometimes we make those suggestions too late in the process when they've put a lot of time and effort into developing details, and we haven't looked at it, and we may change the orientation, we may ask for courtyard access from the street, things like that are better done early on.
Yeah, I understand there are some key things that are better done early on. I'm just concerned about the level of drawings that will come to you in the very beginning. So, but we'll have a further discussion as a city about that. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yes, Commissioner Lang.
Sorry, what, in terms of the right now, you're seeing a lot of different kinds. You're seeing fewer projects than you did. You're seeing a lot of, but you're seeing a variety of projects. Is there an 80-20 rule here? I mean, is there a subset of projects that could move on a faster track, and others that, really do need to follow the path that you're describing? I'm leery of slowing things down in any way, but I'm just wondering if there are any characteristics of projects that you find requiring more engaged review. Size, location.
I think location has a lot to do with it. Size and location. I think some locations are higher profile, impact neighborhoods more than other size projects in other locations. So, and I'm not sure that the
threshold that you could use to distinguish the one from the other.
Well, in our ARB discussions, we thought that anything above 7,500 square feet could come before us. That's been broken down, I see in the presentation tonight, so that in some locations it'll be 10,000 square foot threshold. We thought that was a little high, but there are definitely, there'll be like a smaller project on a side street with maybe 6 or 7 units that may not impact an entire neighborhood than a project of 50 units or something on a major thoroughfare or something bordering, an important neighborhood that has a certain scale to it, or having spent years on the Land Rights Commission as well, 14 to be exact, I'm very aware of neighborhood character. And so a very large project in a high-profile location adjacent to a sensitive neighborhood might be problematic without review. But, it's hard to define exactly what sites you have identified. Main Street and Montana, I think, there's other areas in the city that are also sensitive. So, I would hope that there would be more review of that, but I guess there have to be, some thresholds and the state determines some things as well. So I don't know all the details of all that, but I do know that I think some projects, behooves us to go forward without community input, and the ARB is part of the community process. It's a public meeting. So letting the public weigh in, I think, is also, and it also, lets people be heard and lets us address some of those issues. So through design, eliminating public things creates, anxiety.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Move on to the next caller.
Last 4 digits, 5209. You are now in the meeting, and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. If you could please state your full name.
Good evening, Commissioners. It's Ken Kutcher from Harding, Larmor, Kutcher & Kozel. And I wanted to follow up on the letter that I submitted on streamlining approvals of by right applications, some of which touch on comments that have been made during the hearing already. Our 2 overarching concerns are that the AA approval process does not have a timetable for decision-making by the staff members that are reviewing those applications. And we think that's a serious deficiency. I know it's come up before and staff has been resistant to that, but we really think that's a critical component of having streamlined review. And second overall comment touches on some of the same things that we just heard from ARB member Kaplan, and that's the timing for review of these streamlined projects as drafted in the red line. City staff contemplates getting an AA application and then requiring that the ARB review happen. And then after an ARB review is achieved and an approval is gained, then the AA process would be, the AA application would be completed and an approval issued after that. The concern, as Chair Reese mentioned, and I hear this from clients and architects, is that that's a more detailed level of review to go through ARB, and it's difficult to get funding from investors and lenders to move forward to that level of design review before you have your entitlements. And typically the pattern has been that you would get your entitlement first and then you would go to design review, but at least the members of the project at that point would know that they had an entitlement. With respect to the timing, we can compare what the zoning code up until 2015 required, and that was for AA projects to be applications to be reviewed and approved within 90 days. We think that's an appropriate standard, if not shorter, to be completing AA review. If one compares that with discretionary review that is exempt from CEQA per the Permit Streamlining Act, that's to be accomplished within 60 days. And in this case, there might be occasions where one would say, I would rather go to a design review or a development review permit process where I have a specific timetable that governs when that'll be scheduled for a hearing, and I'll be protected by the HAA rather than going through an ARB or a AA process where there's no timetable whatsoever. So, that's frankly a real concern that I talk about with applicants when we're trying to decide, what path to take in order to move things forward quickly, which is what this streamlined review is supposed to accomplish. And then, I would say that there seems to be some inherent conflict between some of the discussion about design review, where on the one hand, it's supposed to be objective, and the other hand, there's, talk about making, how important it is to be able to force changes on a project. And again, I think those are in conflict. And
Ken, I need you to
wrap up
your comments, please.
Sure. Happy to stop there and see if there's any questions, but appreciate the time. Thanks.
I have a question from Commissioner Lambert for you.
Thank you. Can you give us an idea, I don't want to put you on the spot, of sort of the average time it takes one of your clients to get through the AA process?
I took a look at that, and it's a bit all over the map. And part of that, I'm sure, is a product of the fact that there's no timetable these days. I can tell you that for 2906 Santa Monica Boulevard, AA application with density bonus took 9 months, and that was after they made some changes with a DRP process that had already happened. There's the 100% affordable housing project across the street from the Miramar. That AA application took 5 months. That was 100% affordable housing. There's the project on the current vacant bank site across from the 4th Street light rail stop, and that's been 8 months so far and still counting. We don't have any approval yet. So, and then the worst one I'm aware of, it's not a housing project, is a office project, which you also, the commission also acted on for a CUP for ground floor creative office. That was 1820 Broadway. and that project took 15 months for the AA component of it.
Okay, that gives me an idea. Final question. A lot of what we hear from staff is the impossibility of doing a time frame because oftentimes developers are not prompt in responding to information that has been requested of them. When staff, and I can ask staff this too, is the developer given a time deadline basically for submitting information that staff has requested?
They're not giving it up front. If I know that on occasion, if developers are not responsive, I've seen letters be received by developers that says, if you don't respond within such and such a time frame, we're going to dismiss your application and you have to refile. I would be comfortable, frankly, with if there's a time deadline for processing an AA application and there's a request to supplement the application that's legitimate by city staff, whatever time the developer takes to respond to that or their architect takes to respond to that request for more information, staff shouldn't be penalized for that. Just don't count those days as part of the schedule for getting an approval.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
I don't want to penalize staff.
If the applicant is slow in getting back, the city's time clock should stop.
Absolutely
So
agree.
Our processing time would be extended to the point that you're late. So that makes sense?
Yes, definitely. And most developers, they're concerned about time unless, it's a complicated matter for them to work through. They want to be extremely responsive in terms of time. But it's fair. Don't penalize staff because an applicant is taking time to respond for more information.
We have one other question for you right now, Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
Yeah, this is a question sort of parallel to what Commissioner Lambert was asking. When the clock starts ticking, walk me through what happens, and maybe this is a question for Jing. A project is submitted, and is it deemed complete, meaning it has all the required sheets of elevations, parking plan, whatever it is, and then the clock starts ticking, whether it's 90 days or 60 days, or the project is submitted, and then along the way someone says, oh my God, they don't have a roof plan. Yeah, I see the question I'm asking. When does the clock actually start ticking?
Yeah, in my view, the clock for processing a AA application or any application, that starts ticking after the 30 days has run and it's deemed complete, or there's a request for additional information within those first 30 days by city staff, and then that information submitted by the applicant, and then it's reviewed again for another 30 days to determine whether it's complete. And then once you finally get to the point where you're deemed complete, that's when the clock starts ticking.
I see. So all the time until it's deemed complete is really not on the clock. It's happening independently. It's not in our code. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay. There's also the HAA provides that if within the time frame to deem it complete, there's not identification of code problems, then any code issues can't be used any longer. That's the state imposed that. I didn't impose that. So that 30 days, that first 30 days to review the application is important on a number of fronts.
Can you walk me through that again? Are you saying that the state imposed that you could submit an incomplete application and start the clock running? Is that
No. If when an applicant submits an application, staff has 30 days and they got to use those, and they have to identify if there's things incomplete or if there's things that are violative of code, and that's supposed to happen within that first 30 days.
And that's by state law, you're saying? Complete or non-conforming?
Yeah, that's a combination both of the Permit Streamlining Act and the HAA protections.
Okay.
And it's just and so the HAA protections only apply to, projects that are housing projects, as we've talked about.
Right. Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Kretcher, I don't see any other questions for you, so I'm going to thank you for your time, and we're going to move to our next caller.
Sure, appreciate all the attention. Thank you very much.
Last four digits, 1463. You are now in the meeting, and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. If you could state your full name, please.
Hi, it's Paula Larmer with Harding Larmer, Kutcher and Kozel. I'll just follow up on the conversation that you all were just having with Ken. Specifically, we thought really hard about this today about how could you come up with a structure that would make sure there was meaningful streamlining in the code for housing projects as Program 1A says there's going to be, but also not penalize the city when the applicant needs to take more time to respond. So we had thought, and we hope that this could be codified in our local code, because even if it is in state law, there has been debates in the past about whether certain state laws apply to certain housing projects. And we think if you're a housing project and you qualify for the streamlining, there should be a clear 30 days to deem the application complete. After that, there should be 30 days to provide a notification to the applicant. As to, once it's deemed complete, there should only be 30 days to inform the applicant as to whether there's any code inconsistencies. And then overall, for projects of 150 units or less, 60 days from deemed complete to approval. And for larger projects, 90 days from deemed complete to approval. And again, with the 60 and 90-day outer time periods, any time where the applicant is responding to the city would not count towards those time periods. And we think that both accomplishes what you all are trying to accomplish with the streamlining, but doesn't penalize you. What I can't figure out is how the ARB review fits in a meaningfully streamlined process. And I'm very open to it. I definitely want to see the potential for ARB to fit within there, but it's just very hard for me to see based on the current ARB application requirements. And my question is, are we revising the ARB application fundamentally to make this clear that this is not getting into like the very granular weeds of the materials? Because in my experience, the level of plans required for administrative approval is quite different. And often after an AA is approved, people have to stop and invest more money to get the plans up ready to go to ARB. So I just would like to better understand how staff sees that working and whether there's something that we can't see going on in terms of restructuring what that review looks like. And then I also wanted to remind you all about the time period where the applicant can't even file their application. Right now, under the code, the applicant cannot even file their application if their building's over 40 years until there's the 75-day period, which ends up becoming 85 days or longer because you haven't been able to pay the city hasn't processed your application and given you the opportunity to pay your fee, and you have to do a community meeting before. So I really feel strongly that those elements should be able to run concurrently while these other two processes are going. Thank you for your time.
Hold on. We have a question or two for you. You need to repeat to me what you said about the 75, 85 days before, Ann, please.
Sure. So if you have a property with a building over 40 years, which most properties do in Santa Monica, you cannot file any planning application until you've first gone through the 75-day hold period to give any member of the public an opportunity to designate to file an application to designate your property as a historic resource or a landmark.
Okay, I understand. I didn't hear the landmark part about it before. And then I'm going to ask one more quick question before I turn to Commissioner Fresco, which is the timeframes that you're putting out there, the 60 days for 150. This seems to come from state code. This is somewhat consistent with the SB 35 rules that we operate under. Is that true? Is that where you're trying to base this off of?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was the Housing Accountability Act that Ken commented earlier that where the city only has a certain period of time to identify any inconsistencies with the code for your project. Otherwise, you're deemed consistent with the code. So that was the 150 unit threshold. They get 30 extra days for projects that are larger than 150 units. So we tried to work really hard to make those work together.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Fresco? You're muted. You're muted.
Hi, Paula. Sorry. I just wanted to ask some questions about the 75-day waiting period. How often does that actually come into play in a big project? Because wouldn't checking for that kind of thing be part of due diligence? And wouldn't that be something that you would take care of and wait for really early on while you're still preparing your application? I don't see why that is really.
So the issue is that you have tenants that are trying to have their businesses survive and don't like a huge sign saying notice of intent to demolish being posted. That's often one of the reasons why, in the past, which I understand why we're not going back to the past where you could wait till the very end, but in the past why people would wait sometimes was the tenants, the existing tenants who are trying to do business, hate that sign and feel like their business goes down significantly once that sign is posted and that you're harming their business. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is if there's a sale transaction, right, the seller might not let you do that before the close. You have to wait until the close. And I just feel like your guys' policy goal of making sure that gets taken care of early and you're not, getting some beautiful housing project all the way through the process and done is solved by allowing that to run concurrently.
So are you saying that if somebody is trying to buy a property and hasn't closed yet, that they're already preparing their application? So on the closing day, they're ready to submit it and start that 30-day clock?
They may, yeah. There's a lot of, different situations. People structure their deals in many different ways, but it does, I will just say it's often the delay for us to file a new application is we have to wait out this period first. We're ready, we have the plans ready to file.
I find that so, and it's also such a risk. What about the risk factor that they have all their plans and they haven't, and then they want to do that concurrently? Then what kind of jeopardy does that put the next step if, a determination if somebody decides to file an application during the landmark application during the 75-day period, then what does that, that's a whole other risk factor. So it's a risk either way, isn't it?
It is a risk, yeah, that's for sure. It's just some people may choose to take that risk as opposed to waiting. And it used to be, the other problem that I see with it is that it creates a problem with your SB 330 protections, right? So the first problem with the 75 days was we couldn't even file the applications. And then in theory, the city can change the rules on you. And if you have a larger project, there may be people that come in and say, we want to have an emergency ordinance to change the rules on you. Now SB 330 allows you to file that application where first, and the city can't block that one, so you file the SB 330, but then that only lasts for 6 months. So the other issue is that it takes away all these days where your 6-month period is running on you. So there's this issue between the SB 330 as well that it hasn't, thankfully, we haven't seen it come to a halt, but we've identified it as a huge potential risk.
Okay, thank you. We'll discuss this later. Thank you for answering.
Commissioner Lambert has a question for you.
I just wanted to remind Nina and ask Paula what she thinks that a few months ago we agreed to do concurrent processing for SB 330 purposes of the landmark application or the demolition application and the preliminary application because of the SB 330 time limits. And Paula, would you concur that that's a good idea?
Yeah, but you guys are already doing that. The state requires you to accept the preliminary application first.
No, I understand that, but have the concurrent demolition, have the demolition review concurrent with the preliminary application.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is,
I know.
you know, if I was in the next city over, if I was in a different city, I would get my state right. Would I file my SB 330 and I have a full 6 months, right, to file my
Right.
administrative approval and go through this. But like with the way you guys are doing it, I can file my SB 330 and my demo permit on the same day, but I'm blocked out from filing my AA application for at least 85 days usually.
Right, right. Good point.
Well,
Thank
for
you.
them, well, anyway, sorry.
Okay, let's move on to the next caller, please.
There are no more callers in the queue now.
Okay. Then we're going to come back to commission, and this is time to ask questions before we get into discussion. I will kick it off. My two concerns would be about the level of plans for ARB if they're done prior to the AA. And is that a real concern, and how do we adjust for that? Because I do think there's a ton of value in getting design input early on before your plans get set. But I just worry about making sure you get to that hearing, and all of a sudden they say, well, you don't have your material board. You can't come to us without a material board. But they haven't really thought through the materials because they didn't know they had an entitlement yet.
Okay. Is it okay if I take that? What I would say is that most of the time when we receive an AA application, before we receive the ARB application, we do have a sense of what the materials are. As someone is designing a project, even schematic design, they're typically budgeting the materials and doing that budget all the way through concept to schematic design to design development. So often, almost all the time, we have a sense of what the materials are. We would certainly review the submittal requirements and modify them with a modified process. As Board Member Kaplan was saying, we would likely expect lighting to be done after the ARB review, and that could be reviewed with the objective design standards during the plan check period. We would likely ask only for a concept for the landscaping and not a full planting plan, which is the kind of thing that we're getting now. So I don't see it being a hardship and really outside of accepted architectural practice, because we will be modifying the submittal requirements prior to ARB review.
Okay, so there's two key things. One is you're going to make some adjustments to the requirements, and B, you're saying that these are generally design issues that are being thought of from the very beginning, and they will incorporate them into the plans.
That's right.
Okay. I'm going to jump out to my other question, which now goes back to the timing of the process. And for Jing, is there a concern on your part? Well, so they put a proposal out. We've heard a proposal tonight where we put on some timelines that are told at the point where it's in the applicant's lap. So if the applicant has to make revisions, then your timeline is frozen. Is that kind of concept, and I'm not saying the specific dates that we heard tonight, but is that kind of concept okay with you, or is that palatable for staff?
I think one thing I do want to clarify is I heard some erroneous testimony about the process, that we're following under SB 330. So I just want to be really clear for the record that, just about every housing project that we are processing right now is an SB 330 project. And, I'm not aware of the city missing deadlines. We're absolutely on top of them. So the way it works is when a formal application comes in, we have 30 days to deem the application complete. If it's incomplete, then it's back in the applicant's court to respond. And then once they respond, we review it again with another 30 days until it's deemed complete. And for the most part, most of these are complete. There may be a handful that aren't. Once it's deemed complete, then the city has 30 days or 60 days, depending on the size of the project. And you heard about that 150 unit threshold is where you get additional days to do that, to do the code compliance comments. When these applications come in, they are routed to, multiple like reviewing departments, and everybody is aware of those timeframes, and they get those comments back to the planner to distribute to the applicant. So again, those code compliance comments are distributed back to the applicant within those timeframes, and then we're into the review process. What happens in that time is that there is certainly time that is with the applicant to provide time to respond to comments. That is things that are out of the city's control. We also deal probably in about every project questions and challenges to code interpretations that take time to resolve. It's rare that there's absolute agreement on everything. There's always questions about reading things a different way. Could it be this? Even things that appear clear in the code. There's questions. That's a very normal part of the development review process. And that is a big reason I think that this is that we follow the timelines that are within SB 330. And when I look at the sort of overall layout of that process, the intent is to number one, determine it complete, and then secondly, provide sort of the checklist initially, right, that we're all working from, and then it whittles down from there. So it provides clarity to the applicant on what's necessary to finally get to a code compliant project that we can issue a determination on. Even with the reductions in staff and the slew of projects that came in all at once, we are staying on top of those timelines. I'm confident of that. So we feel quite comfortable with the SB 330 timelines with respect to housing projects. But in terms of putting, a concept of, tolling in the applicant's court, I think, if that's leading to sort of, a time frame or a maximum time frame for review, I think we've had this discussion, considerable discussion about this in prior meetings, about having sort of an end frame. It's like, what does that mean, in terms of having an end time frame? Like, what happens? Are we prepared to deem the application approved? Like, where does it go from there? If there is indeed like a final time frame, because these are ministerial approvals, then what happens at that point? Secondly, resources are out of our control. We have the people we have. We truly do the best we can. We are not dragging our feet currently on reviewing any of these, and we are subject to multiple changes in state laws and local laws and trying to reconcile all of that all at once while trying to keep on top of permitting work. And these are things that, we are doing the best we can. And again, we're not delaying on any of it. And so, I think from staff's perspective, we are absolutely, in compliance with SB 330 timelines. I think we're moving forward efficiently, as you can see, this work on housing implementation to, clarify the process around, I think, most questions in recent memory have been around state density bonus law and like how to address, this FAR issue, right, and all this thing, right? I mean, it's been months of discussion with HCD and working with applicants, on this, and I think that's where, it feels like, that we're on the crux, I think, of establishing, I think a system that would be workable if we can continue forward with it, and I think, seeing. Having the experience of processing upwards of, I think it's like 13 to 15 of these SB 330 applications, these are timelines that the staff is very much, understands. And it's not just planning staff, it's public works, mobility, building safety, fire. I mean, everybody who reviews, these projects, we coordinate, everybody's aware, of the priority on these and the timeframes that they're under. So, again, in terms of sort of that concept of like, would we consider, tolling time that's in the applicant's court? I mean, right now, I don't know that that's different than what we do. It's time with them until it comes back to us. And then when it comes back to us, we review it in the order received, again, cognizant of those time frames, depending on who came in first.
Yeah. And I think the tolling is only a critical discussion if there's an end time. But let me just try to understand exactly what you're saying to me. And I sense you guys are stressed over the work, and we're not trying to make it harder. We're just trying to get to the bottom of it. So I apologize if this comes off as hostile questions, but you're telling us that you have 30 days to give them a deemed complete. And if they don't have deemed complete, then you write them a letter in that 30 days and you tell them what's out of compliance. And then in theory, they come back to you. And once they come back, you have another 30 days to make sure that they have come into compliance. Those are two deadlines that I'm hearing you talk about, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So there's the first one, which is like determining application completeness, and we're limited to the checklist in the application form. You know, if you give it to us, it's complete. You know, there's nothing extra. Like the law is very clear about that. We can't just make up something, you know, that's not on the list. And then the second part is depending on the size of the project, 150 unit threshold. You know, you have like 30 or 60 days to provide, you know, comments about the project's compliance with the city's, you know, codes, programs, policies, and the like.
Okay. And then the question, I think, the real crux of the question is, so what happens after? There's nothing after that. Then you just go through the process, and
Correct.
people either are conformance with the plans or they're not conformance with the plans. And what you're highlighting to us is a big problem is, what happens if 6 months goes by and you haven't gotten them approved? Are you just going to hand them a building permit? Or do they have the right to come to the planning commission and say, hey, they're not processing? I mean, that's your conundrum, is what happens at the end.
And like I said, you know, the whole point to us, and I think we try to faithfully execute this, is that, you know, we give a list of comments from the beginning. It's like, respond to these comments, go down these lists of comments and address them. And, you know, if you submit revised plans that, you know, don't address half the comment, I mean, it's just sort of like, you know, I mean, you know, you're aware, you know, in this work, it is a back and forth, you know, it's a part of the development review process. But I think, you know, once we establish that list, we sort of work from that and whittle it down, you know, until all the comments have been addressed, right? And then you're in compliance with code and the determination is issued. You know, and so, you know, to add, you know, that back and forth it needs to happen, you know, because like I said, it's more complicated than a black and white of city issues, you know, and the applicant does this, you know, because oftentimes while the applicant is preparing the response, there are multiple meetings where there's questions and interpretation of code that take time. You know, sometimes they ask something that is like, okay, you know, that's a question I've never come up with before, or, you know, you're asking about, you know, something that, you know, you don't really see in this, you know, but we try to be, you know, as a courtesy, very considerate to those questions and try to provide a meaningful response. And that is something, sometimes it's not a simple question, you know, that's being asked, especially if they're, you know, challenging a code interpretation. You know,
I understand. There's a whole series of issues that could come up in that process after deemed complete to approved, and where it makes it very difficult to put a timeline. So I'm going to end my questions, and I see Commissioner Tolkien and Commissioner Font, and then Commissioner Fontaine already with her. Commissioner Tolkien first, and then Lambert.
I was just wondering, in this process, we were talking about the ARB. Where does the ARB now fall in this streamlined process? Because it's really difficult, given the requirements of the ARB, to come in before the entitlements are had.
Sure, I can start, and I think Stephanie can I think augment. I think in just the basics in terms of where it falls in the process is that right now under our current process, you go through a preliminary review with the ARB. So we usually schedule that after the first round of code compliance comments has gone out. What we don't want to do is to bring to the ARB a project that is like substantially out of compliance, you know, with the code. If it's found like, okay, you know, this is code compliant, we don't want the ARB to see something that is, you know, could change substantially because, you know, things are just in the wrong place, right? So that's where it fits right now, and that's where I think we would anticipate, you know, it falling within that process. And I think
so you do this preliminary review before the ARB?
Yeah, we do. And I think Stephanie can speak to, I think, you know, some of what we anticipate is sort of, I think, a different level of design review, you know, going forward maybe than what people have been used to in the past.
Yes, so thank you, Jane. Yes, this is a good question. So typically what we do the preliminary review, I would say 2/3 of the way, 2/3 or 3/4 of the way into the administrative approval process or the development review process. So where, you know, we understand, as Jane has said, We understand that the project is code compliant. It's not quite finished with its AA review, and so what we're very focused on is not adding time to that entitlement review process. That's what our staff is extremely focused on, that the ARB at that point is not adding time to the entitlement process. And what we are receiving, we are naturally receiving plans that have enough information to get meaningful comments back from the ARB. And there's a robust discussion in preliminary review. The SB 330 projects that we're currently processing have been going through this preliminary review, and the ARB is having very good, very sophisticated, holistic discussions on the projects that we're getting. So I don't see a problem with the amount of information that we'll be getting to do that review.
Thank you.
Mr. Fontainebleau, I believe, was next, and then Commissioner Lambert.
This is a question for Jing, and then I'd like to talk to Stephanie. So the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, I show it with my project, and I get 30 days to get it complete. I get a response from you, say you're missing the following things. So I go back to my architect, say, please add the following things. They do that. They resubmit. And then there's another 30 days for you to decide, yes, you're good. You now can move to the next stage, which is basically the compliance review. And if I'm a certain size, I get either 30 or 60 days for that compliance review. Is that correct?
Right. I think you might have added an extra 30 days in there, but it's application submittal, 30 days to deem it complete. This is just city side. So we have 30 days to get out a letter, listing whether it's complete or incomplete. If it's complete, great. Then that's the sort of like next date, beginning date, for then 30 or 60 days to get another set of written comments to the applicant in terms of here are all the ways that the project does or doesn't comply with the code.
And so every time there is a resubmittal, either for completion or for compliance, it starts a 30-day clock ticking. Is that correct?
So under SB 330, it does there isn't another 30 days in it. That has to do more with the review for application completeness. So let's say you submit and it's incomplete. Then once you submit for the review of completeness, the city gets another 30 days to determine it complete again. For the purposes of compliance review, it's just for that first round. That initial round is where the deadline of 30 or 60 days provide written comments. But once there's a resubmittal, there is not a state timeline to review it. But that being said, we obviously, we take things in as they come in the order they do, because sometimes it might be 3 months, or 4 months until we get it in, and we're in the middle of, the planner's in the middle of reviewing another project that has more urgent deadlines, so that has to take priority.
I understand that. So, and I think that was the concern indicated by that letter. It's that compliance part that can stretch out, that can really kind of get a little longer than most people would like. But let's just put that aside. And then, and this is a question, I guess, for Stephanie. If that's the model we're working with, where does the ARB review come in? Where does it actually happen in this process?
During compliance review.
Okay. So
towards the end, obviously, because as Jing mentioned, if a project is over height or not complying with setbacks, it's not really productive for the ARB to be reviewing a project that's substantially out of compliance, particularly in this new model where they will have the one review during entitlement review, and there won't be, the sort of follow-up review that we have now.
So then let me understand. If it's during the compliance review that the first ARB submittal occurs, is it during the first 30 days or is it in the 4 months, the second compliance review?
It's not during the completeness review. That first 30 days that we're talking about is completeness, right?
Right. That's already happened now.
Right.
So now,
yes, not during that initial phase. It will typically be after that initial compliance review is done, that the applicant has received comments about how they need to modify their projects so that they are code compliant, and they have resubmitted so they're generally code compliant.
Okay. And so that would have to be clarified in our new process, that sequence, just the way you've described it with so the only discussion is end date now. That's really the question that's before us.
I mean, if it's necessary to clarify it, we can clarify it. I mean, that's what's naturally been happening. We haven't heard any complaints about it.
Okay. And where in this process does the demolition permit kick in? Where does that start in your mind?
Well, it's not in my mind. Our policy is that the demolition permit application is done before we take in the formal application. We do take in SB 330 applications as we need to, but then we do not take any submittal, formal submittals for projects AA or DR until that 75-day waiting period is completed. Because in the past, we have had projects that we are processing, and we're processing and going way down the line with processing a project, and lo and behold, there will be a landmark application on the project. And so a developer has spent an intensive amount of time and money developing a project and processing a project, and then the entire process has to stop for the landmark application process, nomination and application process to occur. That's why we changed our process a few years ago so that the demolition application process and 75-day waiting period is done before we receive that application, so that there's not that level of investment by a developer. And yes, everybody gets it.
Okay. Okay. So thank you for your response.
Okay. Commissioner Lambert, you had your hand up next.
I just want to follow up question to Stephanie. It's really not our worry about taking a risk. Their worry. And if they're willing to do it with concurrent applications, don't you think it's appropriate they take the risk and we don't protect them by doing it ahead of time?
Well, that's a policy decision that y'all will have to think about.
I think we've talked about that. I have some questions, and I don't want to sound adversarial because I have total respect for you guys and how you're spending your time and what you're doing. But I am just really perplexed, and I have been all through this process, of how we can consider a streamlining process that does not have timeframes. Because streamlining means that. And I'd like you to explain how this is a streamlined process with no schedule. And then the other thing is, I mean, we have SB 330, we have SB 35, we have the Streamlining Act. We're complying with all those rules regarding streamlining. Why are we adverse to putting that into a local process, particularly with developer tolling included?
So I think, to be clear, the streamlining is about not having a public hearing.
Well, I think other people have different ideas about what streamlining means.
That's fair, but the program 1A language is written is about public hearing or no public hearing. This discussion around, an endpoint of a timeline, I think I've explained extensively, that the city's following a process that, I don't know of any housing project that's in here right now that isn't filing under SB 330, which is understandable. That's absolutely their right. And I think as we've maintained that where there is, a state timeline, we're following it. I would expect that to be potentially the case going forward. To suggest that we're not following timelines, I don't think is accurate. Because we are certainly processing under, the required timelines by the state. Again, if there's an interest in an endpoint of what have you, I think that we do need to tackle that question of, what is it that we're trying to achieve at the end of that? What does it mean? What is the subsequent step, beyond that?
Let me clarify, Jing, something. The SB 330 is only for the 6 months and then 30 days. And is that the last time frame it imposes?
No. So there's a preliminary application.
Right.
You have 6 months to submit the formal,
Right.
and what I've been talking about is once you submit a formal application and you've paid the fees and want to go through the process for an actual project. And so I don't think it's just anything to be flippant about. These are timelines that are required in state law. That's 30 days to determine the application complete, and then depending on the size of the project, it's 30 days or 60 days to provide written comments, on the project's compliance with code. And then, with subsequent rounds, not been like delays, like substantial delays that I'm aware of just under these current crop of projects that we're processing. So, I recognize, that perceptions may be based on prior experiences, when, again, that the city was working through, a lot of different state laws and what have you, but certainly in this recent crop of processing housing projects, these are timelines that we've embedded and baked into our process. And I think we're going to continue, to follow that, obviously, but, there are nuances and complexities to a development review process, that is not, it is not broken down to just a simple, back and forth, right? There is of these timeframes, there are often in every project ongoing discussions between the applicant, that it's not easy to pinpoint, like, okay, it was in your court or it was in my court, because there are sort of these like midpoint conversations between formal submittals, that I think, account for a substantial amount of time actually in processing, that it quite frankly would be very hard, to codify.
Are we going to change our thinking if SB 35 comes into effect? We're going to have to change our way of doing things, right?
Of course, again, if someone chooses to avail themselves of that process, we will follow those timelines in there, So, this is about, I think certainty in the project approval. We're basically saying, here's a set of rules. If you submit a project that complies with these rules, you are guaranteed to have an approval, but there is a process to review that, to determine whether the project does comply. When we talk about streamlining, like not having a public hearing, that's a big deal. Not every city in California does this, and this is something that Santa Monica has chosen to do, in order to provide certainty in the housing approvals process, and that is the purpose of Program 1A.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, other questions right now, comments? Okay. Staff, what other direction are you looking for from us? I'm
I
curious
think it's
if I should entertain a break 2.5 hours into this, or are we close to the end of this?
I mean, it's really the three. Well, I guess the only topic we haven't touched on, and maybe because it's pretty, straightforward, I think, is the city-owned exemption of city-owned sites from the zoning ordinance. To provide a sort of more open and flexible process. But I think we certainly had great feedback tonight, on in your questions on the red lines for the design review process and the proposed implementation of Program 1A and the streamlined approvals. That was our 3 focus points tonight.
Okay, Commissioner Landers.
I mean, if we're almost done, I was holding some of my other comments till the end of this discussion about ARBs. So if we're all but there, I'm happy to make the comments now and jump in. If we have more to do, I'd probably love a break.
Let's do a break.
Let's do a quick break and come back.
Okay.
We don't need to rush through this. Let's do.
Okay.
It's 7:21. Let's come back at 7:30.
Okay.
weird. My background came back all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're still waiting on, what is it? Sean, there we go. Okay.
Nina.
No,
There's Nina. Okay.
We're all here now. Okay, let's
Cool.
move forward. In thinking about this, Jing, I know this is frustration for you, but if we're going through an AA, a streamlined AA, and it could be faster if I go through an entitlement and apply SB 35 or something. I mean, I guess there's a difference because SB 35 is going to come with a lot more affordable, but you can find some discretionary way through that goes faster. It seems counterproductive. So I wish we could find some way to put an end date that you guys can get comfortable with that doesn't stretch your guys' staffing more than it is. If others want to move on to other questions, I know Commissioner Landers, you said you had some comments.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say on this, I tend to think that any flexibility that the applicant, is at the applicant's own risk, I am comfortable with in terms of getting through the approval process more quickly. In particular, I thought that the letter from Mr. Kutcher that said sort of the applicant could opt in at its own risk to simultaneous ARB consideration or simultaneous filing. I didn't see a problem there because the burden was going to be on the applicant, not on the city. And as far as the deadline goes, I agree. I would like to see some deadlines. But I also think that there are ways to do it, as Ms. Larmore and others were suggesting, that would essentially give the city, not hold the city responsible for delays by the applicant, and also then not hold the applicant hostage to delays by the city. So I hope that could be worked out. I had a couple of specific issues. One that I'm going to say it because I just think it's something where we need to do some more work. We're talking about the 1 acre piece where I have my doubts about whether or not that ought to be included in the 1 acre threshold where it sits. I understand the city's position, but I think it's a gray area, and I think we're at some risk. It's not the size of a project. For me, what it is the impact that it has on the impact that it could potentially have on the surrounding neighborhood. And let's just name it. I mean, that whole conversation started around a project, at Lincoln and Ocean Park. And in the conversations that I had, it struck me that there were certainly people in the community who simply didn't want any more housing there. While I understand where they're coming from, that's not where we are right now. That's not what state law is telling us. That's not what the economy is telling us. That's not what housing inequality and housing inadequacy is telling us. But there were other people who were, in my experience, generally pro-housing, but had real concerns about the circulation elements of the project as they saw it. And I would like to see, and I'm not sure that we can do it here, but I don't know where else to say it, so I'm going to say it here. I would like to see us invest in some objective circulation standards that can be shared with that can be, worked through with the community, so that we can build in some confidence that when these projects come in, that there are that there's attention paid to the circulation, that there are ways for members of the surrounding community to communicate their concerns, and that there's some kind of a feedback loop. And it could be through the AA process. I'm not suggesting that it be a hearing, but I think we need to do better than we did, because it was kind of ridiculous, for people. I'll just use that project as the example because it's not coming to us. There are real circulation impacts is the wrong word. That's what we're trying to avoid. There are real circulation conflicts due to the fact that that's a downhill, uphill cycling route. There are buses on Lincoln. There are people crossing the streets. And the project as proposed had any number of blind spots, at least to my lay eyes. So I would like to see us come up with, if we're investing in this ARB objective design process, I would like to see circulation design taken seriously in that conversation, so that there is greater confidence for the public that when these large projects come in, that they know that their lived concerns about moving around safely in those neighborhoods are taken into consideration. Because the concerns that I heard were not from people who were anti-housing. They were not. They were simply saying this is stuff we have to navigate, and we're not seeing. We're not seeing evidence that there's an awareness of the ecosystem, of the circulation ecosystem. So that's one thing. And then my other comment is, and I want to come back to the community assembly. It's a question and a comment. Staff asked, so I want us to kind of take that on. Staff asked about the requirements about unit mix and TDM. And I was wondering whether we could apply the unit mix and TDM requirements only to the market rate units if they included market rate units. And what impact that would have. I do want to incentivize housing on these sites, but I also don't want to just suddenly have a whole case of exempt, market rate units that are exempt from all the things.
So, sorry, just for clarity, I think you might be jumping ahead to programs we're going to talk about on November the 30th.
Am I? I apologize.
Community assembly.
That's my fault for reading the whole staff report.
It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Then I don't have to talk. Then I don't have to ask that question. Terrific. And then, just to be clear, that's really good. Just to be clear, I had one other question, but maybe I don't have to ask it now. Yeah, because we're not talking about the moderate overlay. Good. Okay, then I'm good. So that's my rant. My rant is about circulation design, and my rant is over.
Okay. Commissioner Lambert, we are in need of a rant. Can you help us?
I'm good at rants. I just have one point, and then I'm done. I really object to the 1 acre exclusion in terms of discretionary, non-discretionary. I think it's not in compliance with Program 1A. I think it's wonderful that only a couple of the SSI sites are affected by it, but the school district site is not one of them. I mean, actually, it is one of them. But there are other sites, large sites in Santa Monica, that will be creamed by this. And one of them was a former regional activity center, and that's the Vaughn site on Wilshire. Whether that's ever redeveloped or not, I don't know, but it would be affected by this 1 acre threshold. And there are others. I mean, I don't know if Pavilions in Montana is ever going to go anywhere, but there are large sites that could be redeveloped in Santa Monica that would be affected by this. But most importantly, I don't think it's in compliance with the housing element, and I think HCD will likely have a problem with that.
Commissioner Fresco.
I'm just having some issues today. I just want to kind of remind everyone that we're working on the housing element and part of our general plan, which also covers circulation and sustainability and mobility and historic preservation. And there's like 7 of them, and I can't think of them all right now. But I think we have to remember that housing is very important, and we've done a lot of really great things to enable housing. We have upzoned the hell out of the city, and we've removed tons of constraints in our building code. And a lot of our discussion today is kind of leaking into everything and making every one of the other elements of our general plan kind of kneel to the housing. And I know housing is really important, but if we forget to always look at our city holistically, we're going to have a terrible city in a few years. And it's just really important to remember our values as a community. And ARB is that kind of design review. As there's no such thing as objective design standards. There's building standards, but design is not objective. And if we want to have excellent design, we need it to be reviewed by a group of people, so that, which is how you get to objectivity in something that's not objective, is to have a group. I just am so worried about all of these things all bowing. The 75-day thing, that to me, I mean, when I spoke to Paula just now, between the ARB review overlay with the period, that time frame, and the 75-day time frame, all of these things, I mean, how many properties could it really, truly impact? You know, I mean, we can't change every single thing so that there's not a single thing in the way, because we'll lose so much in so many other areas. A lot of the demolition permits that do come through are put through by sellers right before they close. It can't be that many, and it's so important. And how many landmarks are we going to lose because of a developer who's willing to push the process, which is very weak right now because so much attention is on housing? I'm sorry. I want everyone to just slow down. That's really what I'm saying.
Commissioner Fresco, I hear you loud and clear, but I'm just wondering, is that the main thing you're looking at is the landmarks issue, or are there other areas where you think we're steamrolling the process?
Well, you know, I mean, going back to our last discussions, the upzoning of Main Street and our economic core of our community, and Sean was just talking about objective mobility standards and circulation standards, which, you know, if we have too many objective standards, it gets more draconian than having discretionary review of things. Because now there's like all of these things that don't quite exactly apply, but you have to conform to them, and you can't create a real project. And I'm just getting very anxious about how far this is going. This is what we're working on. It's a huge project. We think about it all the time, but it's not the only thing. That's all.
All right, Commissioner Lambert, Landris, please respond, but try to be.
I will be brief. No, I mean, I totally get where Commissioner Fresco is coming from. And what I will say is, you know, what frustrates me about this process is the extent to which we are being forced to talk about housing in a complete silo. There are climate issues, there are mobility issues, and the truth is, as someone who is pro-housing, I believe that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I believe that we can create the housing, we can meet our housing responsibility, but we have to do it in a way that's sensitive to climate, sensitive to circulation and mobility, sensitive to open space needs, to all the other pieces. And it's really frustrating, and I'll just say it on the record, it's really frustrating to be told over and over again that no, we can't think about that because the way state law is written, we have to be, you know, entirely in building mode. And so my coming in with a call for objective design, you know, circulation design standards is not because I think that's the best way to do it, but apparently it's the only way to do it. So I'm going to try to thread the needle where there's like maybe a tiny little, I don't know what you even call the, you know, the hole in a needle, but like the eye of the needle. I'm trying to sort of sneak through the eye, and I'm just being very upfront about that because it is frustrating to me to no end that we have to do this.
Bring your camel, Don. I said, bring your camel when you're trying to get it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I saw Commissioner Raskin had his hand up, and he has been
Quiet.
patient and quiet. So let's hear from him.
Well, I wanted to kind of shift gears to a different aspect of the conversation. So if Commissioner Lambert has a point on this topic, I'll defer to her.
What? Oh, I just wanted to respond to Nina and Sean. We're not the brain trust for mobility and climate change, and clearly all of those are considerations in what we're doing. But I assume the mobility division looks at circulation plans for a project. It doesn't necessarily have to come to us. Right now, we're dealing with the housing element and housing production, and that's our mission. That's what we're doing right now. And it's not in a vacuum, and we have a whole city staff of other people who do other things. We don't have to do it all.
Okay. Thank you for that. Commissioner Raskin, go ahead and take us in a different direction.
Thanks. And before I get too far on that direction, I do want to acknowledge the article that Commissioner Lambert shared with us regarding green gentrification. I thought that was really interesting and fits within the broader context of what we're talking about here in a really important way. But I want to get to the topic of 100% affordable housing projects and their process through design review. In the past, we've had a general consensus that those projects should be prioritized through design review, but I'm curious if there is an appetite or a shared interest among my colleagues here to exempt 100% affordable projects from the ARB process, because it is a significant cost and time burden. And I think last time we talked about it, we weren't quite there yet, but I'm hoping that we can get there now.
Question, Commissioner Lambert.
I just want to say thank you, Ellis. I mean, there's an adage that you can always tell an affordable housing project on a block because it's the most well-designed project on the block. So I think there's a lot of rationale for what you're suggesting.
I agree. My affordable clients go to a big degree to get a good architect, and that's their front face to the community. So it's really important to them. I mean, it's a big ask. I think I'm supportive of it, but it's a pretty big ask to give up design review altogether in the city. So I'm open to hear what other comments on that. Fresco.
I'm not ready.
I saw you shaking your head, so that's why I didn't.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. There might be Commissioner Landers. Did you have a comment on this? You're okay. You gave a thumbs up.
No, I would absolutely exempt 100% affordable housing from design review. It's very important that we do that. I mean, essentially, we have to show that we are doing everything that we can to produce the affordable housing. So streamlining the 100% affordable, we should come back. I don't know if we're talking about the moderate overlay another time, but we should probably think about what the moderate overlay can provide in terms of design review exemptions as well. I'd like to put that in the mix, and the community assembly parcels, to the extent that they are, if they're 100% affordable, they should be. I would even exempt those at like 75% affordable or something.
Well, those are next week's next meeting.
Those are next week. But in terms of, I mean, I would take a broadly generous approach to Commissioner Raskin's wise proposal. Say yes and.
Right. Well, I'm sensing there's a 4-3 vote, but I haven't heard from Commissioner Fonda-Bernardi or Tolkien. Commissioner Fonda-Bernardi.
I don't think that 100% affordable housing gets an automatic pass, because today affordable housing has to be designed really well because of all the NIMBYism it has to deal with. It has to be able to respond to the funding sources. It's got all these constraints. But once we've basically taken a state law that has gutted all restraints, I think the quality of affordable housing is going to drop because now they've been given basically green light uber alles. They can just do whatever they want, and it's not going to be the way it's been in the past. Right now, they live in a very specific environment, a design environment, but that environment has substantially changed. I don't think it's changed for the better. I think that the ARB review is an important part of what's happening. And I think that it can be fitted into the timeline because the timeline is not such that you can't fit it in without really losing time. I think it can be fitted in just the way we've been discussing it.
Okay, Commissioner Fresco.
I guess today I just want to say, because everybody always prefaces, and I need to say it too, I am a housing advocate. I feel very strongly about housing, that we need it. But I think our housing element needs to achieve the housing that is required of us, but I don't think we need to erase as many rules as possible to show that we really, 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 really want to do it in order to demonstrate that we're housing advocates. I think we need to do enough to make it happen. And coming up with more and more ways that we can show how great we are at this is not going to get us that much closer. And I think we've done so much. And I'm just really worried about the future.
Okay. Jane, do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I think just a couple things. I think, when you say you want it to be exempt from design review, it may be helpful to clarify, do you like no design standards whatsoever? Is it objective design standards? That may be helpful just to understand like what you mean when you say exempt from design review. And I think secondly, we've in terms of prioritizing affordable housing, because pretty much every affordable housing project is under some kind of extreme time restriction, because of funding sources and when they need to pull building permits and what have you. We bend over backwards, move heaven and earth, to make sure that these projects get their building permits on time, go through the design review process. They're absolutely prioritizing. If they tell us, hey, we have a timeline, we need to get there, we do that to get them there and still complete the process. I think sort of a third consideration, I think we would just like the opportunity to also research a little bit more is, and this I guess is a pro and a con, is that, treating market rate and affordable projects differently. I think we just want to explore, potential fair housing implications of that, affordable housing projects, are you allowed just to live in a lesser environment or what have you? I think as a city, Santa Monica has historically taken a lot of pride that, you can't point out an affordable housing project from a market rate project in the city. They blend so well, and a lot of that has to do with, both the nonprofit, who's bringing it forward, but a big part of it is also sort of setting those expectations, through a process. But I don't know that the design review process has been onerous, in that regard. So I think just a few things for thought, as we're kind of talking through this concept.
Okay, Commissioner Raskin.
Well, just and thank you, Jingo. That's, I think, all important points to, that I certainly take to heart. My primary goal here was really just to bring costs down. And, I think what I was thinking of primarily was, not needing ARB approval. And, even if it's, not a tremendous cost in the big picture of things, I think it still will make a tangible difference in the outcome. But I don't know, maybe this is something we can revisit then, after we've had a chance to look a little bit more thoroughly at all of those implications. But it's something certainly I'm interested in pursuing as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Flanen-Bernardi.
Yeah, in the interest of making things simpler, I think the Commissioner Kaplan was going in the right direction. We should require schematic landscape plan of everybody going through ARB, not just people who are doing housing, which, is really, you don't need to have a full irrigation plan to understand the massing and the amount of greenery in a project. But I think that's something that should be extended to everybody, that ability to just do a schematic planning. And then in our code, we would say something like, it has to be xeriscape, blah, 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 blah. You can add all those things later. And likewise, I don't actually understand why we need a lighting plan, or for ARB purposes, we should have the same codes that govern safety. There has to be enough light for people to walk safely or park their cars safely. That's already provided for by the building code. If you're concerned about the look of the lanterns or the look of the lighting, well, that's a very small detail. I'm not sure it belongs in the scale with the massing and the materiality of the project. It's really tiny little pieces of jewelry that I'm wondering if they should be even at all under discussion in an ARB format. So what I'm saying is there's ways to simplify things, and I know this is going against what Commissioner Fresco was saying, but there might be simplifications that benefit everybody, and that now's the time to, if we're going to make these changes, we can extend them to a lot of places where they're really needed. So anyway, that was just one way of looking at reducing the cost of an ARB approval.
Well, I think staff made some comment earlier about not requiring the lighting or the irrigation during that ARB, but they would require it at, during the plan check process or some
Sure.
other
That's the point I'm making. You're going to have to design lighting sometime, and you're going to have to design landscape thoroughly sometime, but it shouldn't even be part of the basically the ARB approval, except for the landscape massing. We want to know how much greenery is going to be visible and those kinds of things.
Okay. I think staff will chime in if they had wanted to refute that, but I think they did tell us that they were going to push that towards the end. And I do appreciate your comments, Commissioner Fonda-Minardi, about the time frame that the affordable folks or the frame of reference that the affordable folks are working in right now. They do have to go to a really big detail to sell these projects, and as we try to streamline this in the future, they might lose some of that incentive, and that to me is a good argument on why not running into this issue right away, and we can consider this and see how it works out in the years to come. I don't know if commissioners, you have other comments on the staff report. I don't know if this is appropriate. If I don't see anybody else raising their hands, so I just want to throw out two things. When I'm looking at the DRP findings, we have these terms in there that are in A that we use the word compatible, and that worries me. We in F or in E we use promotes the general welfare of the community, and F it says that there are no unacceptable adverse effects, and I just find all of those are really subjective and can be problematic in our findings. So to the extent you can try to wordsmith that or define those terms, I think it would be a benefit.
I just want to say that welfare in the community in that context is actually a race-related residual concept. I think that's what it means. Doesn't mean sewage.
Well, it could mean so many things. That's the thing.
Right.
It's so open-ended.
Right. And I think with compatible, we've been talking about the word responsive instead.
Yeah, I thought we had worked out something not using that word. So.
Yeah, I think we're certainly happy to take a look at those again. I think that has been the subject of internal staff discussions as well. These findings were written, I don't know, 50 years ago maybe. So certainly an opportunity to them and update them.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, Commission?
I am comfortable with the 1 acre limitation. I can live with that. And it affects a very small number of projects. And Commissioner Lambert, you mentioned the Vons project. Vons project already has been approved by us with a huge building that had actually surprisingly high affordability ratios. I'm just, let me finish. And so what I'm saying is that I think there are some beneficial constraints when projects get to a certain size. They require a higher review. And I think that 1 acre is a logical place for that.
Okay, and let me correct that. I was talking about the Vons on Wilshire. That was a regional activity center in the 2010.
Right, but that's covered by the parking lot. That's parking lot side of our discussion regarding housing.
Well, if somebody wants to take down the supermarket, like the Vons project on Lincoln, it would be covered. It would be handled by this, with this 1 acre thing.
Commissioner Raskin?
I meant to ask this clarifying question earlier, but is the IZO that set the 1 acre limitation set to expire next January, or when's that going to expire?
It will expire, I believe it's end of March or April. I'm not remembering exactly. I can look that up right now, though.
Okay. Yeah, I don't need an exact answer. I was just curious.
My point is, I think it violates the housing element. That's my issue.
Yeah, and I will back you up on that, Commissioner Lambert. I do not want to do anything that violates the housing element. I do not want to be in a situation where somebody has the opportunity to submit builder's remedies
Exactly.
on us again. So I'm just going to urge, and I'm sure the city attorney is paying careful attention to this because it's been brought up in public comment. But you need to make sure that this is really legally defensible so that we don't end up with more builder's remedy projects.
Yes.
We are. Absolutely. Understood.
I assumed you guys would be. Okay. Are we done? Are we good with these comments for right now, folks? Okay. So I'm going to close off this agenda item and we're going to turn to item 10. And before I do that, I will say thank you, staff. We appreciate, we know you are working long hours to come to us and have us try, and we appear to be nitpicking your work, or not appear to be, we are nitpicking your work, but it is our job and we don't do that with malice. We're just doing it to try to make sure we're getting as good a document as possible. So with that, we'll move on to item 10, public comment on items this is for items that are not on our agenda. And if we could get a 1-minute timer, which would start the opportunity for people to call in and talk to us about an item that is not on our agenda. Oh, there it is.
We did not receive any calls.
Okay. With that, Commission, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and it's now 8:05, and I appreciate everyone's time tonight. Be back here in a couple of weeks. Have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.